Back here on the show to continue on some more quarterback discussions on today's show. This time more on Aaron Rodgers, talking about his trip to Egypt, why he missed mandatory minicamp, and not only that, he expanded a little bit more on just the differences between minicamp and OTAs truly now that the NFL is going a bit more of a safer route, trying to emphasize player safety. He brings up the differences in discussing why he was absent from mandatory minicamp. He briefly touched on it. We talked about it when he mentioned it at a golf event, I think before last week, but now he expanded on it a little bit more when he appeared on the Pardon My Take podcast released yesterday. In that episode, kind of justifying his side of the whole story on why he decided to do that, why he went on the trip. And you guys can follow along on the screen. Obviously, he said that I'm struggling to find it. The thing that people don't understand was that when I was in the NFC North, yes, years ago, there used to be a real thing called minicamp. It was 5 practices in 3 days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. 2 practices on Friday, 2 on Saturday, and 1 on Sunday. Now it's not minicamp, and right away, that's an obvious point to make. Rodgers bringing up the fact that, like I said, the NFL is going more of a safer route. You can see it in some of the rules and just stricter rules, actually, on some of the safety protocols that they have to follow. You're not allowed to touch on anybody. You're hardly allowed to really look at somebody the wrong way, honestly, in OTAs and the voluntary workouts, unless you want to get punished. The Lions were punished and had one of their practices taken away because they went overboard on one of them, or they had too much contact in one of their practices or something like that. So they got punished for it, and honestly, you see it with those type of rules, the contact rules, and now also in training camp, everyone's supposed to wear those funny looking helmet covers. You're not really allowed to make direct contact with each other's helmets for concussion protocols and stuff like that. So that just follows along with what Rodgers is saying. Everybody always talks about, like Rodgers alludes to, the old 2-a-day practices, how training camp and I guess even mini camp, like Rodgers is saying, used to be more of a grind. It used to be more grueling, where maybe you still didn't go full on and hit everybody, but at least you were there twice a day. Now the NFL has really gone away from that over the last few years, and that leads into the next thing Aaron Rodgers wanted to mention, and how is mandatory minicamp really mandatory, or is it really just that influx of a different phase, upgrading to a different progression in the offseason program? Is there much of a difference between OTAs and minicamp at the end of the day? To that, he said that they can arbitrarily put a tag on whatever week of OTAs they want and say, this is the minicamp week, which makes it somehow more mandatory than the other weeks, but it was an OTA schedule. That's how words can be a little deceiving from time to time. They can make a story about how I missed a mini camp when it was really 2 OTA days. I came to the first 10, alluding to the fact that, right away, leading up to that week, everybody figured that Aaron Rodgers was going to be there. Everybody figures that more of the players are going to rejoin their team during that week. Obviously, players, everybody around the NFL hears mandatory minicamp, so naturally, obviously, you think all the quarterbacks maybe that were holding out are going to be there. Some of the players that decided to work out by themselves, they're going to show up now and rejoin the team because it is mandatory. There are consequences if you don't show up, but Aaron Rodgers was absent from it for an unexcused absence. Everybody was searching everywhere to find out why he wasn't there. Then it came out that he was on an Egypt trip. That was pre-planned, and then people had their own opinions of it. But mostly the players in the locker room, his teammates, were asked about it. They didn't really feel that it mattered too much. They felt that, like Rodgers was saying before, really at the end of this statement, that most of his teammates said that he was here mostly when he didn't have to be. He was here throughout most of the offseason, so they really didn't have a problem with it. And Rodgers says the same thing. He came to the first part of it, made the first 10 practices, and then he missed the last 2 because to him there wasn't much of a difference, explaining how to go along with those safety protocols. The difference from OTAs now to minicamp, really, he is saying that there's hardly any difference now. They're on an OTA schedule, as he put it, and he felt I guess, indifferent about missing the same level of intensity, the same level of training that they were going to do in minicamp because it was mandatory. He felt that there was really no difference in missing that time compared to OTAs because it really is just an extended period of OTAs in his mind. And to go off of that, I think that leads up into a whole nother discussion, still keeping it around Aaron Rodgers, but he brings up an interesting point on just how this offseason structure now with minicamp and OTAs isn't really, again, what it used to be and really just could be a problem for the NFL, I think, macroly, that players just are starting to find this as indifferent at different phases of the offseason because really it just shows how the structure of this offseason now is not taken too seriously at all. Players naturally, religiously skip the voluntary portions, right, because those are the easiest ones to not get any criticism behind. They feel that they could train better by themselves. If the NFL is going to have these rules that you're not allowed to really touch anybody, you're not really, if you're not implementing something brand new, again, players will just decide to stay home, work out by themselves, or maybe they could go a little bit harder than the NFL allows them to when they're in a group setting. Also, same thing with OTAs. A bunch of players skip that frequently, but once they hear mandatory minicamp, everybody takes it more seriously, naturally, but I don't think it's for the right reasons. I just think that they hear mandatory, so they feel like they have to be there just because they're told to be there. It's mandatory, and you get fined, obviously, because of it. Nobody wants to lose money, but nobody is really there to amp up the intensity, to amp up the level of progression that you get when you're playing a more in a football-like environment, if that makes sense, right? In OTAs, voluntary stuff, you kind of know that you're just walking through it. You're implementing new stuff, maybe. You're walking through it. You have a little bit of pep in your step, but it's still football in shirts and shorts. You might have a helmet on, maybe, but even then, it's still pretty much the same thing. Then, once you hear mandatory minicamp, you'd naturally think that you'd get a little bit more game-like. I don't know, maybe you could shove somebody or something to the ground. You can be a little bit more physical on a pass contention or something like that. But it really seems like Aaron Rodgers puts it, it's just a continuation of OTAs. But also, like Aaron Rodgers says, they just decide to label it mandatory minicamp, where really there's nothing changing from that. And I think that's a problem now for the NFL and why you hear all these reports coming out that they are really looking at changing the offseason, because not only are they starting a little bit too soon for some people that, again, believe that they don't have to be there. If people are going to skip it, why do they make it seem like you have to be there? Now, you get to this minicamp issue with OTAs not really being too different, and that's where it becomes a bigger problem because nobody's really taking it seriously now. And I think now, if anything, maybe more players start to think that it's becoming a bit more acceptable to not be there. Of course, you have to think of the financial consequences of it, but still, with Aaron Rodgers talking about it like this, it doesn't paint it in a great picture and a great image at all. And also, going back to his teammates, if you think about it, if I'm a teammate of Aaron Rodgers or just a teammate of anybody when in any sport, honestly, if you get to a point, I'm sure if you've played sports, you've gotten to a point where you're in the off-season, you're training with people during a phase where maybe you don't have to be there, but of course, you kind of have to be in good spirits with everybody. If you're there, fine with everybody in like a chilled environment, in a nonchalant, pretty easygoing part of practice, but then once you hit August, if it truly gets harder and everybody's in this grind, everybody's bonding over, working hard, pushing each other to the limits, and one guy decides to take a vacation, that's where I think it becomes a problem because he almost believes that he's above it. You don't get that same sort of chemistry, that same sort of bond with a guy that decides to skip the hardest part of the offseason when everybody's there working together, improving themselves. But in this case, nobody is really bothered by it because, to support Aaron Rodgers' point, OTAs into minicamp, nothing really changed. It was just an extended portion of OTAs, it seems like, according to Aaron Rodgers. So no one's really going to have a problem with him missing it anyway. And the financial part about it, honestly, to Aaron Rodgers, doesn't really matter too much. And even for the Jets, holding him to a different standard if they decide to not fine him, It's Aaron Rodgers. I don't think that surprises anybody if the Jets don't decide to fine him, because he is this entire team. Honestly, if we're speaking truthfully, if he's not there, if he's not happy with something, something's probably going to change, because so much is invested in Aaron Rodgers. Not to say that he should be held to the highest pedestal, to the highest environment, but that's just the reality of things. Patrick Mahomes, same thing. Josh Allen, same thing. Tom Brady, you can name all the quarterbacks. But you could also say that they were there during mandatory minicamp, where Aaron Rodgers wasn't. But pre-planned trip to Egypt, how much difference is there between OTAs and minicamp is really something that this statement has opened my eyes to a little bit. And that's why, really, the NFL should probably do something more about changing the structure of it, really making it more intense, keeping it within the limits of safety to try and not have it look like it's just unnecessary for players to be there. You want them to be there. You want them to support this structure that the NFL has laid out for them. So Rodgers talking about it like this doesn't really do that. But overall, I felt indifferent about it. I didn't think it was too big a deal that he wasn't there, because really at the end of the day, yes, you want him to have chemistry. You want him to have as much reps with this team, but it's not like he's learning a new system. You know, they brought Nathaniel Hackett over for a reason, to implement the same offense that Aaron Rodgers was comfortable with. So it's not like he has to learn a whole new thing and learn the timing of everything too much, because he has been throwing to some of his teammates since the end of last year while they were still playing. He was able to throw again. So I think he's had an adamant of time of being there, of learning the timing with everything, because again, it's an offense that he's used to. It's an offense that he's run plenty of times while he was in Green Bay. So that argument that he should have more reps, should try to be on the same page with everybody, kind of gets diluted a little bit when it's the exact same offense he's been running for however many years in the past. If anything does go wrong, it's probably on the other guys. But you want to sharpen that. Aaron Rodgers has been there for a while, so I really didn't feel too ill-willed about it. I didn't think it was too big of a problem. But now, starting training camp, he will be there. They actually reported today. I assume they're going to have their first practice tomorrow, so that'll be more of a telling sign on where they are and how much really that trip, missing mandatory minicamp, really affected any sort of chemistry or anything like that with the players. But moving on from this topic, moving on from what Aaron Rodgers says, we're going to go straight into another break in the show. But when we return, we're going to talk about the Dallas Cowboys, what Stephen Jones said about where they are in the contract negotiations, his level of optimism in getting all three of Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb, and Dak Prescott's contracts done. And is this the end of their Super Bowl window? I think that's a legitimate question that we're going to answer after this break. We'll be right back after this.